Hello and welcome to this next edition of the VFS eVTOL Writers Group interview. Today we have a very special interview for you with the leaders at Volocopter. For a little bit of housekeeping, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of both Florian and Oliver at the end of the session. You can utilize the chat/questions box in order to submit your question, and everything else should go very smoothly. So with that, I will turn it over to our distinguished moderator today, Mr. Charles Alcott, who's a senior editor for AIN. Charles, take it away.
Will do. Thank you very much, Jim. I hope everybody can hear me, and it's very good to be getting together again. So greetings from my side of the pond, where I'm joined by one of Europe's leading contenders in the advanced air mobility space race, as I sometimes call it. And that company, of course, is Volocopter. So we're glad to welcome Florian Reuter, who is the company's CEO. He's the gentleman there with the black jumper and the beard. And also with us in the blue shirt is Oliver Reinhardt. He is Volocopter's head of certification and quality, which is arguably the most important role in any company like this at the moment. Well, starting with Florian, he has a degree in business engineering, and before joining Volocopter, he was with the Siemens Group, where he was responsible for the development of technology startups. So I suppose it's quite logical that he's ended up in a place like Volocopter. And Oliver joined the company in 2018. He's a very experienced manager for aviation design and certification projects. He was previously Chief Technology Officer with an EASA-approved design organization called Flight Design, and he certainly has plenty of work on his plate now. Well, from my recollection, it's been almost 10 years since the company was formed in 2011, and along with many rivals, Volocopter is now entering a critical phase as it strives to achieve its goal of getting its Velocity aircraft into commercial service by around 2023, give or take a few months. So Florian and Oliver, thank you for joining us. Can we please hear from you on how your ambitious plans are advancing now we're in a new year?
Yes, Charles, and also welcome from our side. Thank you for having us. I loved your introduction, Charles, in saying that Oliver has probably the most important role in such a company, because you are right? We share that view that certification is the key to unlock this market, and I think it is not giving enough attention in these days, if you ask us. So we're absolutely delighted to be, giving you more insights into Volocopter. Before we do that, I want to thank each and every one of you, for covering this space. I think you have done a tremendous job in creating, this dynamic that we are currently observing out there in the market. I think this is an important building block for getting this off the ground. We're equally excited, and I hope you continue covering us. And we're here today to really share you our perspectives from Volocopter. Many things some of you might already well know, other things might be less known. So we're happy to exchange, provide you with our view, and of course enter into Q&A after the initial presentation. I'm here today with Oliver, and I would suggest we move forward one slide. And as already introduced, Volocopter, quick intro. We are all about developing, certifying, manufacturing, and then operating our Velocity aircraft, which is intended to be the world's first full EASA certified commercial air taxi. Yes, you heard right. We don't intend to just simply build the vehicle and then send it off to operators. We definitely want to share, to have a part in the share in the operation of our vehicles. There's a number of factors to that, and I'm happy to cover that as part of the presentation. When we talk about the Velocity, this is an aircraft that is absolutely designed to meet the requirements of the urban mission, meaning we completely comply with EASA's safety threshold, safety targets in the order of failure mode of 10 to the power of -9, meaning this is an extremely high safety target, as I don't have to explain to this audience in much detail. We believe it is valid to go in that direction. Simply, yes, we have only 2 passengers on board, but at the same time, what's more relevant is what can happen on the ground. Plus, keep in mind, we intend to operate thousands, if not 10,000 of these vehicles at any point in time across all cities around the world, meaning empirical statistics ultimately will play against us. So we think it is warranted to go into the most stringent certification requirements. Second key element here is noise and public acceptance, and we're going to cover that as part of the presentation as well. In order to scale our services and receive the acceptance of the neighborhoods, that's a key element, and we believe the Volocopter excels on that dimension. We have opted for a battery swap model in our vehicle, meaning with existing battery technology, we just simply feel this is the most feasible way to improve our turnaround economics in terms of minimizing the time that is spent on the ground. We want to continue delivering our missions and safely transporting passengers from one place to the other within the city. We have a two-seater vehicle. We believe this is the sweet spot. We're going to cover that in more detail throughout the presentation. Obviously, in order to have a predictable path to commercial revenues, we have agreed with the authorities to put a fully certified pilot on board at the early stages. That's an extra effort for us, right? Because at heart, this vehicle flies by light, so we don't really need a pilot on board, but simply because it gives us this predictable pathway into existing certification and regimes, that's the path we've chosen. But obviously, we would benefit tremendously from once we can turn into complete autonomous operations. And last but not least, and I think that's important, despite the limitation of having a pilot on board, we can offer our services at an attractive price point, fully profitable from the start. So as we start scaling our services across more cities around the globe, this scale-up phase will not have to be subsidized. It will be fully profitable from the first route on. So with that brief introduction, happy to quickly introduce myself and let Oliver introduce himself a bit more if we move on to the next slide. As kindly introduced, I've been CEO of Volocopter now for more than 6 years. Believe me, it feels like a lifetime and more because it's been a hell of a ride, right? We started out as true visionaries, only seeing obstacles everywhere, but we've accomplished quite a bit, I would say, as an industry, and I do think Volocopter's played an important part of creating some of the milestones along the way. So we feel extremely excited about the inflection point that we have reached now as an industry. At the same time, as excited as we are, we think it is necessary to sometimes also, hit the reality button and kind of talk about, where do we see substance, where are proof points that we can point to, and where do we see more castles in the sky. So I'm happy to also comment on this as part of the Q&A later on. With that, over to Oliver.
Yes, hello everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here on the panel also today. Charles already mentioned before briefly about my position that I had before joining Volocopter. Actually, you mentioned correctly, 2018 I joined Volocopter, but not to forget the 2 years before I was already working from an external side to Volocopter. And that was, I was diving into it. I was also starting, well, can it work? Can it be? Can it become reality? And after getting the insights into it, I recognized, yes, exactly that's the way how to do it, how to approach it. So I finally came on board in there. What I'm bringing also into this, and you mentioned fully correct, certification is one of the crucial elements in here. Just in my position before, when working for flight design, I was in the rulemaking task groups from EASA and FAA doing the Part 23 CS23 rewrite. And that was where I learned, okay, there is an openness now to really embrace new technologies, to prepare the grounds to get these new technologies into the air and to make it reality. And that is, of course, now something we can strongly build upon. And what was helping us massively to come to common grounds with the authorities to say, that's the way how we can get these vehicles on board. So from that end, yeah, it was a logical succession for me to go into that business in there, and happy to speak then later on a bit about where we stand in certification, how we are approaching it, what is our feeling with the different authorities in there, and where do we see the good traction. Back to Florian.
Great. So if we move on, we want to jump right into the story and then get to the more interactive part of the session. Really look forward to that. So quickly covering, what mission did we choose? Why did we, select the vehicle design that we have? And next slide, please. Quick summary of what, major announcements that we've done towards the end of 2020. And the fact that I want to point to is, when you talk about eVTOL companies, there's a lot of talk out there right now, and I think it's totally legitimate to always ask, what's the technical feasibility of this approach? Is it fit for certification, and is it commercially viable? And I think it's not always that transparent to get to actual proof points. And we believe one of the best proof points is really, certification progress that is, third party, that a third party can assess, and also the quality of partners and their commitments to your project. And based on this, we were really proud to have a great lineup of partners. So a couple of things that you see here, for example, we signed a framework agreement with our investor, DB Schenker, one of the top 3 world's leading logistics companies, on jointly commercializing the Volodrone towards their customers. Right? Huge sign of confidence. The picture in the middle, that's our announcement of us bringing urban air mobility to Paris in time for the Paris 2024 Olympics. Part of that consortium, and our partners are ADP, Aéroport de Paris, right? They're running the Charles de Gaulle Airport, as well as RATP, the local public transportation authority, as well as local politicians. They are all aligned around this. There's public announcements around this. And believe me, when the airport operator of Paris decides on a partner for the introduction of eVTOL, he does call EASA and get a background check on who he is actively publicly exposing himself with. So naturally there's a lot of scrutiny that goes into publications like that. On the right hand side you see ADAC. ADAC is the emergency helicopter operator in Germany. They are operating the largest fleet of civil helicopters in all of Europe. So if somebody knows helicopter operations, it's ADAC. They're the largest customer, civil customer of Airbus helicopters. They have conducted an extensive feasibility study with Volocopter, and the conclusion was they see huge potential for multicopters to improve helicopter emergency and medical care. And they have ordered 2 Volocopter vehicles because there's a public statement from the CEO of ADAC saying no other eVTOL company in the world is able to supply a meaningful product at this stage except Volocopter. So again, we're pointing towards our partners because simply we believe that's what gives us the best credibility rather than just us telling about it. We are actively working with Lufthansa Industry Solutions on our digital backbone for orchestrating the urban air mobility ecosystem. We have launched the first tickets campaign of selling 1,000 tickets at the price of 300 euros each, right? Testing the waters in terms of pricing sensitivity for our services, sold out within 3 weeks. And of course, we have revealed our Volocity as part of the Paris announcement. So if we move on, a question that we very often get is, why do you stay all electric, right? There's certain limitations to battery technology today. And, why do you focus so much on the urban mission? 2 answers. One, the urban mission is where the lion's share of the market lies, according to our analysis and our belief. And I think there's a lot of studies, and it's growing, that are confirming that. Secondly, because we believe today's batteries are perfectly viable for the urban mission. The urban mission is described by us as a mission that is about 20 miles around the city center. And we found that 93 of the top 100 major airports around the world are actually within that distance to the city center. So if we move forward 1 slide, looking at the population densities and the conglomerations, around the world, if we look at some of those, metropolitan areas, we will see that, okay, this is 30-kilometer radius, so, approximately 20-mile radius. That very well covers the lion's share of our populations and actually mobility movements across any major city around the world, right? There's a few exceptions to it, but most cities are very well covered. And we can get to that, coverage with today's battery technologies. There's no magic sauce to that. And therefore, we believe we're perfectly viable to start with what we have today. And we can then benefit from any advancement that we will see from the battery side going forward. Another word on hybrid, because I saw some of the questions around that. If we want to scale this at the degree that we intend to scale it, make it a ubiquitous new transportation mode of the city of the future, I don't think there's any way around being 100% sustainable. And we're fully committed to that. Our batteries will be sourced in the most sustainable way possible. And there's very exciting developments on that end. And of course, they will be charged with fully renewable energy. If that wasn't the case, I think we're completely on the wrong track. So moving on. The seat anxiety topic. I think too many people are focused on just simply getting a car equivalent into the air, right? If we look at the realities in the cities around the world, if we look at today's average taxi occupancy, ride-hailing occupancy, even helicopter shuttle occupancies, the reality is that the lion's share of the market is a 1-passenger transportation market. So if we look at the the potentials that we're going for here with our VoloCity product, you know, for the urban and metro passenger transportation market, and with our VoloDrone for the logistical side. But if we focus on the passenger demand here, you know, we see an 80 billion euro, and that's times 1.2 in dollars equivalent, you know, market opportunity for transporting single passengers in cities all around the world by 2035 to be correct. Meaning there's a huge market opportunity already for a single passenger carrying vehicle out there. And then of course that increases. Many people always have this family traveling in the back of their mind, but really that's the exception. The norm is the single passenger. So if we go on to the next slide, you know, just a couple of comparable data points here in terms of, you know, what the average occupancy is on an Uber Black or a general urban, you know, taxi. And you look at the wealthier a city or country is, you see a decline in average occupancy rates, right? So the moment people can actually afford to travel alone, they do. Pooling might make sense from a rational perspective, but it's really not what we see, you know, in the everyday average life of people. And I think, you know, Blade can probably point towards a very similar direction, you know, when they look at their average occupancies for the helicopter or airport operators, you know, for example, they are profitable if they have at least 3 people on their vehicle, which clearly to me sounds like, well, I probably have a better sweet spot if I have, you know, 2 passengers on my vehicle rather than carrying around the empty load of empty seats. So that's, you know, just a quick, you know, explanation of why we are so vividly, you know, believing, and we're in the 4th generation vehicle now, on, you know, the Volocopter design, focusing on the urban mission, focusing on the 2-seater vehicle, because we believe really this is the sweet spot of the market. Plus, of course, we have a very tangible certification trajectory ahead of us. Good. So moving on the slides. Another important element is the VoloIQ data backend that we have established together with Lufthansa based on a Microsoft Azure platform. The idea here is to really, you know, provide a solution to cities, not just the vehicle, or, you know, keep saying, oh, we want to operate our vehicles. You know, we must explain to them on how we do that, and we must give them the insights that they need. So VoloIQ really orchestrates all elements of the ecosystem, especially the landing sites in the vehicles, and gives us the data transparency around it. It's like a digital representation of the physical world. With that, we can ensure safe operations. We can give cities and regulators the transparency that they need on our operations. And of course, ultimately, we can offer a fantastic user experience, you know, based on the insights that we gain from that. So moving on. Sorry, I don't have control of the slides myself, so I need to kind of give guidance here. You know, the fantastic passenger experience must be completely digitally enhanced. It's, you know, fully integrated with other modes of transportation, and you just simply order a Volocopter ride at the tip of your finger palm, right on your smartphone. It's integrated with, for example, a Grab ride, right? Grab is our partner for Southeast Asia, particularly in Singapore and Jakarta. And then it's just, you know, digital check-in, a super seamless, convenient passenger journey or customer journey throughout our service. Next slide, please. So again, VoloIQ is then at the heart of the entire ecosystem. Ultimately, both our passenger carrying vehicles as well as our cargo drone that you see depicted here are going to be operated fully autonomously, right? And VoloIQ really is then again the enabler to be the digital backbone for it. And then you can see the partner landscape that we've built around the entire, you know, value chain of bringing urban air mobility to life, where we have very deliberately chosen where do we want to play and where do we want to partner. And this is a very deliberate approach, and we're extremely proud of the partnerships that we were able to, you know, craft around this entire ecosystem. We were convinced that together as a consortium, we can offer a holistic, comprehensive solution to the cities from day one. Cities in pole position for us, as publicly declared, Singapore and Paris, but of course we continue our discussions with many other cities, and, you know, we see great interest and enthusiasm from cities all around the world. Good. With that, over to Ollie to you know, give more information on certification. Oliver.
Yeah, happy to share how we are approaching this and where we are standing. Just to keep one thing back into all of our minds, in order to obtain a type certificate, we have very clear regulations here in Europe. You need to be a design organization, an approved design organization, otherwise you will not be eligible to obtain a type certificate. We have this in place since 2019. And so far, we still continue to be the only startup eVTOL company that has reached that milestone. It's a prerequisite actually to be able to obtain the type certificate. We continue to the next slide. When we speak about certification and about approaching our different markets, we have one great advantage within this, and that is that we have done already quite a significant number of public demonstration flights and also test flights in various markets, in various capabilities with various missions in there. I will not go through each one of them. Most of them you're probably familiar with, but just to highlight again, of course, 2016, our very first manned multicopter flight that we did here in Germany to begin our manned flight test campaign. But then already in 2017, flying in Dubai with the verification, acceptance, validations that we needed for Dubai, flying in a fully autonomous mode in the city. So we did demonstrate, yeah, that's possible in there, and we understood what does it take to really be able to do this. Or another example in the middle, Helsinki, flying within a fully up and running international airport, demonstrating that this kind of vehicle can seamlessly integrate with the air traffic and the air traffic management systems, UTM systems up and running at that time on an international airport already today that is up and running. So that was also a very vital milestone for us. Finally, then leading to Singapore, our flight in Marina Bay, significant influences from military airspace, civilian airspace, two major airports around, flying within the city, getting this approved and getting this accepted. That was indeed also a very strong learning curve that we did there, which is now opening the door for us to really go into Singapore as one of our launching cities. That's the background we are taking into this. And if we go to the next slide, we will actually see also one of the triggering factors that also illustrates why we are approaching it holistically, why we say we ultimately also want to be the operator in there. Safety in aviation doesn't come from one single element. The Swiss cheese model is quite famous to describe this in there, basically saying you have multiple layers of defense stacked one on top of each other, and only the complete picture gives the safety to the passenger in the end. By controlling all those layers within our hands, by being the operator and the OEM in one hand, we can balance this extremely well and really come to the sweet spot and the optimum design of each of these stages. If we go to the next slide, then we will see what are the steps that we need to approach and where we are actually standing in this. I already mentioned the design organization. We have this in place. The next part that we need to have in place is a production organization approval or production certificate in the American terms then, which allows us to produce these aircrafts and get them to the air operator, which is the third certificate. EOA is in place, POA we have in place, AOC we are well in progress to get this in place clearly, readily upon time. When I speak AOC, that includes to me maintenance, that includes to me CAMO, that includes to me pilot training. The full range is covered by this and we're working on that. On the right side, we see the natural flow of the steps in a certification project. And right now we are in the middle of testing, validation on system level and having ground and flight testing in place. Quite important then on the left side, we have launched the validations already with the first international authorities, which is on the one side the CAS in Singapore, where it's also publicly visible. The working arrangement has been enhanced between EASA and CAS to enable us to get a same date type certificate with our home type certificate in EASA will. And CAS is fully adopting the requirements that EASA has set in place in there, which is then again having a strong influence on the Asian markets. But we are also in the process with the FAA for a concurrent validation, where we will get the type certificate shortly after reaching the type certificate in Europe. And what is one important thing to observe, as we are also often questioned, how does it go with the US? How is it recognized what EASA is doing compared to what is happening in the US? And the answer we received from the FAA there was very simple and straightforward. Yeah, we know what EASA is doing. We know that they have the superior safety requirements in there. We are happily to directly accept what EASA is doing and take it in the validations under the bilateral agreements that Europe and the USA are having established. If we go to the next slide, then let's have a quick look on some of the aspects. What really does it make to get such an aircraft certified? And yeah, that's also maybe an introduction to to some of the interesting questions that can be asked to the different concepts where we are standing. We've listed here a number of hazards that an aircraft must be protected against, that it must show compliance to have this proper established. And there are elements like multiple system failures. We must have a design that is capable not to just kick in when one of the same unit fails, but also to cover up for errors, human errors in the design process of the hardware, of the software. So that means we have clearly dissimilar systems in place. One of the things we are not observing everywhere in our competitive field right now. Local damages. Our natural design with a ring structure around our rotor ring in here gives us a natural redundancy in load paths. So when we have a bird strike, and in cities that can happen, that's likely to happen, and a component gets damaged, it's fully redundant, the load structure in there. Rotor hazards. Of course, the rotors are shedding at times fragments. They are shedding ice pieces when we start to get a buildup of ice. This must not hit the passengers. This must not hit the ground personnel upon takeoff and landing, and it must not damage the critical systems of the aircraft or hit the batteries. Our rotors up high are clearly sorting that out. Continues on the rotors cascading effects. We have installed them in a way that if we have a damage on one rotor, maybe a second one could be affected by it, but then it stops. That has been clearly vetted with EASA also to be viable and functioning in there. Batteries, yes, thermal runaway on the batteries. That's one of the core burning topics in everybody's minds. We all see the pictures of burning 787 batteries and whatever happened already in the eVTOL testing phases in there. We clearly have placed the batteries on the rear, high up, away also from ground contact, so that the passengers are clearly safe in there. That's just an example for those questions that really need to be answered in order to be ready to certify the aircraft. And we are well set up with our concept in there. And that's actually a result of having now the 5th generation of these vehicles in the types, finally in the type certification. That was a learning curve that you need to go through with such a new novel vehicle. Okay, I see we are advancing significantly in time. I would rather go rapid over the next slide, please. That's just another eye catcher on really showing what it all takes to get under control from the regulatory side, also to be able to bring this kind of vehicle into the air. And for one, it's answering the question, well, is everything in place? Here you see what is all in place, what we are all using, and what we are all working to in order to make it happen. So yes, we have the basis to operate the aircraft, but it's not easy to get there. Yes, we are pushing the authorities rapidly, day by day in there, and happily we find a very positive response from either authority side to say, yes, we want it to happen, so we are happy to listen to you and understand what it needs. Let's make it happen together. That's what we are working on. And with this, happy for questions, and later on, back to Florian.
So I would suggest we continue covering the last point and then we open it up for questions. I'm really looking forward to that. And, you know, we've decided on a vehicle design. We've decided on the mission, which is the urban mission. We will certify the vehicle, right? And we've made awesome progress on our way towards that. So now let's deploy the vehicle in the urban environment. And we believe the #1 concern next to safety, which is covered by certification, is going to be noise. So we want to quickly provide you some information on that. First element, happy to jump to the next slide. You know, I think it can't just simply be a theory exercise on paper. You must ask the people, right? We have demonstrated our volocopters in cities all around the world, as you've seen, right? We've built the trust and the relationships with respective authorities, but we've also flown our vehicle publicly in each of those cities. For example, in Stuttgart in 2019, we were flying in front of a crowd of 12,000 spectators, conducting scientifically based, public acceptance studies on eVTOL, on the application of eVTOLs in a given city. And, we cooperated with the university. And I think one of the most important questions here was, what was your perception of noise before the flight and after the flight? And if you look at the top right bar, you see that on that scale, 3.7 of those people said, wow, the noise level was much better than I expected. And believe me, the Stuttgart audience is a pretty difficult and critical one. So we repeatedly get the feedback, and that's also true, for example, in our Singapore test flight, that people, when seeing the Volocopter flying live in public, are pleasantly surprised about the extremely low noise profile. Sorry. So this is really spectacular. And we believe once you have shown on how quiet these types of vehicles will be, they will not accept louder vehicles at scale operating in proximity to where they live. So I think the noise element is going to be a key differentiator, and we will set the standard by being the first vehicle out there. So if we move forward, of course, there is the science behind it as well. So clearly, we are going and we have already made the acoustic flight testing, right, following the ICAO standards here. The funny anecdote is, we laid out the microphones, we did all the test flights, and then suddenly, we found that at, overflight, we couldn't actually catch the noise of the Volocopter anymore. So the conclusion out of that first noise campaign, together with the EASA experts, was the existing noise standard doesn't really fit to our purposes, because our noise simply cannot be, picked up by the microphones anymore. So we have to come up with a new standard. So next working group was set up. Volocopter, integral part of that working group now, setting up a new noise standard for eVTOLs, which just clearly tells you that we've also beaten the expectations that came out, from the EASA experts conducting these campaigns together with us. So if we talk about the specific numbers, and we've kind of tried to line it up on a visual, chart here. If we look at the next slide, you would see that Volocopter at 65 dB at overflight, right, at around 120 meters distance, so that's somewhere between 300 and 400 feet, which is the operating height that we expect to be operating at. At takeoff and landing, which we believe is the more critical element, if we imagine ubiquitous takeoff and landing across the city, right, in residential neighborhoods as well, we lie at 76 decibel, which is still below the ambient noise that you would have and find in a bigger city, like New York, for example. So clearly, we expect to be setting the noise standard here, and every experience that we have so far clearly ticks the box on public acceptance for the noise. So with that, we want to end the frontal presentation. Happy to take your questions. I believe we have everything it takes. We have it all in place to now kind of continue on a last element of our journey to coming full circle and introduce our services to cities all around the world. And I believe it's very exciting to see that FAA will validate our EASA standards, meaning the US also, has a chance to be quite early and seeing volocopters fly around as part of a ubiquitous new mode of transportation. And we're very excited to be going that journey together with you. Opening up for questions, I saw there were already some that raised their hands on the digital format here. So I don't know, Charles, are you going to moderate that a little bit?
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much indeed, Florian and Oliver. That was very, very helpful indeed. Jim, we've got quite a few questions here backed up. I'm going to start working my way through those so that we tackle as many as possible. And as you know, Jim, I'll have to jump off just before the top of the hour. So maybe you could then pick up any that I haven't got to. So Florian, probably start with you here. We've got a couple of questions that are somewhat related. Brian Garrett Glazer is asking, what assumptions around price, utilization rate, turnaround time between missions will enable you to be profitable right from day one with a pilot on board? And then we've got Salim Zahir. He's on the same track, I think, here. He's saying, can you tell us, I don't think you'll answer this, but can you tell us roughly what a ticket price would be? Because he reckons $300 for 15 minutes probably won't cut it in the market. So we just want a bit more detail on your sort of business assumptions, I suppose. And
happy to cover that. And thank you, Brian, Salim, for the questions. Great to be in exchange via this format here. Look, we have a very robust cost assumptions from day one, simply because we have already all contracts in place for our initial series of vehicles, right? So we have extremely robust cost structures in place. If we look, and of course we have our assumptions then going beyond that. So if we look at the outset, we expect to be able to offer a trip. And let's take the New York airport shuttle as an example, simply because it's something that many people can relate to. If we, for example, fly from Lower Manhattan out to JFK, it's a 10-mile trip. It's not a long distance, right? If you take a cab today, you pay around $100. If you take a Blade helicopter operator, they will advertise the price of $250. If you check between now and June, there's not that many days where you will actually get that price. So usually it's about 2 to 3 times higher than that. No, at the outset, we believe if we assume a price point of, let's say, $200, we can already make a healthy profit on that. So we don't have to subsidize such an offer. And I think at the outset, where we will have very humble beginnings, right? One landing site here, one landing site there, whatever, a handful, 2 handful of volocopters, we will be supply constrained, not demand constrained at that price point. So I think that's a no-brainer to find acceptance for that price level. And then, of course, if we then look towards the price or cost reduction potential that we have in our bill of materials and everything that's involved also in the infrastructure and ecosystem side, we do see the clear potential to be offering that at the range of what today a taxi costs, at the price range of around $100 for such a trip. And I think this is a huge value proposition for everyone wanting to make that trip.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. We've got an anonymous question here. Let me see. How would you differentiate your aircraft from others in development that have greater range, speed, and payload? Is it primarily just cost? And the question is saying, look, there are now several so-called eVTOL unicorns out there, supposedly worth more than $1 billion. So what's your secret? Does Volocopter simply need less money to get to market? Are you just more frugal and able to get there at less expense?
Oliver, let me start, and then happy to complete. So it's interesting, right? Also, when we talk about this price comparison element, right? We're being challenged when we talk to cities, but also investors and things. We're being challenged from our assumptions, where we can show a lot of empirical data and contracts behind it and proof points, with vehicles and assumptions that haven't even flown once, not to speak of manned or in a relevant context or with a relevant certification. So it's really interesting on many players in this whole industry, right, don't seem to be differentiating between what is real and what is yet to prove to be real. And that includes some of companies that are extremely highly valued indeed. So far we've spent more than 120 million euros, which isn't little money. I think it puts us amongst the top 5 in this industry. Nevertheless, obviously, you need a lot of capital to get this over the line. So as Volocopter as well, we will deploy significantly more capital towards this last phase. We expect another 2 years until we have full type certificate. Nevertheless, obviously, the amount of money and the amount of time you need also depends on the vehicle complexity that you have. And we've decided for the multicopter also because it has much lower complexity than other vehicles. And therefore, we do believe we can be much faster and indeed more capital efficient than other programs out there. Oliver, happy to also hear your additions to that.
Yeah, so you described this part of the game already extremely well. And on the other side, I mean, yeah, to get really an aircraft design that can serve the mission, you really must target exactly what is the purpose that you want to serve. And there is no crossover vehicle that really can manage all the missions at the same high efficient, in the same high efficient way. And that is actually what we have been doing. As Florian was showing in the beginning, we are targeting clearly the city market, the inner city market. And there we have a significant market potential available that very well justifies this. And if you really want to go into this inner city, you need to be silent. You need to be able to get into the smallest niches to take off and land between the buildings in there. And you have a rather short flight. So your vertical climb out and climb and then descent phase is much longer than your cruise phase. So having a design that is tailored for a long cruise at high speed, that just doesn't fit the purpose in the cities in there. And that is one thing that you also see when comparing the different concepts in there. Our concept is really designed to that. And that's also why we know for sure the energy efficiency is significantly superior to come in this city context compared to other aircrafts designed for longer missions on the longer runs in there. But when you go with these into the cities, you have higher disk loading, you have significantly higher noise, you have significant higher challenges in maneuvering between the buildings at higher speeds in there. That gives you so much operational limitations in that, so it doesn't really compete with this. So always make sure then really to compare apples with apples, pears with pears, and we are in that context. That's why we are also pointing so clearly at it. In a city, that's our mission, and that's what we are tailored for. And there, with this concept, we have the optimum design, which coincidentally is also the much more straightforward design to get certified.
Excellent.
I don't want to comment too much on valuations of other companies, but clearly, we have a very our own opinion on, where's the substance, where's the probability of success, where lies the risks. So, we're looking forward to a very exciting journey in the coming months.
Good. Yeah. No, you've made that very clear. You've picked a clear business model, and you're sticking with that. So, somewhat related is Ken Swartz's question. He's saying, how do you think that the urban eVTOL market will be segmented, given that major cities will probably have multiple types of eVTOL aircraft flying alongside each other, possibly slightly different business models, different operators? So I think what he's getting at here is try and paint a picture for us as to what it might be like in a city that's big enough to support different types of operation. Are you all going to be fighting over the same vertiports? Will you complement each other? How's that going to look?
That's a great question, and I think this is obviously crystal ball a little bit, right? In terms of difficult to predict in all details. However, we obviously have an opinion on this. I think when you look at all of these announcements right now, again, you need to look at them over a timeline. And we believe at the outset we're going to be the ones flying into the city for many years to come without direct competition, simply because the more advanced vehicles that we see out there are fulfilling different configuration, different mission, and the ones that do directly compare to our multi-copter concept are either not fit for certification or many years behind. So I think there will be certain elements of, okay, so what do we find when we start, and what will we implement over the initial years where there's not that many players available at all, right? They won't be all there at the same time. So there will be a natural succession of events, we expect. And then secondly, if we look at the cities and looking at using resources efficiently, I don't think it makes much sense to have too many vehicles that serve identical missions, but have proprietary infrastructure and so on. So I think eventually, yes, there will be some sort of more standardization around the infrastructure. But again, I don't think there will be more than probably one or two players serving a specific mission. It will rather be more an interplay of different vehicles serving different missions. And some vertiports will be more modular to accommodate different vehicle configurations for different missions, whereas others will be primarily dedicated to being a landing site for an urban mission, for example. So that's kind of how we see this playing out. But again, that's one of the very interesting things that we look forward to seeing playing out in the coming months and years then on who will be actively operating, how fast, and I think that will determine pretty much also the outcome.
Yes, fair enough. We don't know what that will look like yet. We've got some more technical questions here from Nicola McFall, and the questions are: what activity is going on, what work is going on with regards to the management of airspace within major cities, so that the potential volumes of flights from different operators can be managed safely? And not entirely related, but I'm going to bunch it together. What's the maximum number of rotor failures that your vehicle can cope with and still land safely? So maybe we'll deal with airspace first and then rotors. Okay. Oliver or Florian, whoever. Yes, Oliver, off you go.
Yeah, off I go. Into the airspace. Yeah, that's of course a very, very vital question in there. And it's not without reason that we have dedicated staff on board that worked before for the national ANS provider here in Germany on exactly developing those systems for the urban missions in there before joining Volocopter a few years ago already. So we are working there very intensively with the different authorities and with the different air navigation service providers in there, because what we are doing in there, that's a crosscut between classical air traffic management systems that we need to interface with, and for sure what is called the U-space. In whatever format it materializes in the different regions of the world. So that is indeed one of the elements where we are in strong exchange with the different use-based service providers, so that our aircraft is designed to be technology or system agnostic, so we can interface with each of those systems that are visible right now. And that was part of the game also when flying in Singapore, when flying in Helsinki, to test the validity of these kind of systems, so that we can properly interface with the different participants in the airspace that we also have to expect within the cities in there. And for sure, also our VoloIQ database that Florian briefly mentioned is a very vital part in that picture to really complete our availabilities in there. So yes, that's a valid topic. And yes, we are actively working on it with all the target cities that we are approaching in there. That's part of the picture that we are sharpening at the same time with everybody on the way to go live.
And Oliver, just very quickly on this one, I think the technology is there. It's just kind of now about the question on what is the standard and what standard does each city select for themselves. So I think it's just a matter of taking those decisions going forward. Ollie, on the motor failures.
Yeah, and on the motor failures, as Florian mentioned briefly before, we have the clear requirement 10 to the -9, so a maximum one catastrophic failure in 1 billion flight hours is our design requirement. So also for the design of the motors and the redundancy in the motor system, that is a driving factor. And with this, we are by design at the point we can compensate any two rotors failing in any combination, in any position, in any sequence simultaneously or whatever. We can compensate a third rotor to fail in most of the positions as well. And then we start to come to the point where by the EASA definitions, we would not ensure continued safe flight and landing. That doesn't mean we drop out of the sky. That just means we cannot ensure continued reserve climbing capabilities to continue fly to a regularly planned landing spot. So that's still not the point where the aircraft would be lost in such a case. And that's the 10 to the -9 threshold is already passed when the third one comes into the game.
Good point. Okay, I've got another question here, essentially about business models, I suppose, and it's from Ken Swartz. So he's talking about the people who are going to invest in the infrastructure, so the vertiports and all the charging equipment that will be needed and other things to support your operations. How are they going to earn a return on their investment? I know you are sort of involved yourselves in potentially building vertiports, but how do you see that? Is there going to be some sort of charge per passenger, or are they just going to earn money, selling food at the terminal or duty free or whatever? How's that going to work?
So again, there's it's a bit more complex than that. So allow me to elaborate on that. So one, of course, we would like to make sure that we're as integrated with the infrastructure provider as possible. Meaning, we don't intend to build the infrastructure per se, right? That's not core to our business model. But of course, we want to look and feel. We want it to look and feel according to our customer experience expectations, and obviously, it needs to meet our safety expectations. And we want it to be fully integrated with our vehicle operations. So there's a strong partnership between us and the entity, running ultimately, building and running then the vertiport infrastructure. In terms of the business model, yes, it is a charge per landing or charge per passenger. We believe it makes sense to differentiate between, for example, different passenger loads or different vehicle weights, simply because, of course, the drain on the infrastructure is a different one. At the same time, initially, putting a vertiport on top of your building is an initial upfront cost. However, if you look at a prime real estate in an inner city environment, and now suddenly you have one skyrise that has a Voloport on top, and the one next to it does not have it, I think the incremental investment to get a Voloport on top of a prime real estate, within an inner city, is absolutely negligible if you think about the appreciation that the entire property will receive by now having access to this new mode of transport. And we've seen this, in our discussions with real estate developers all over the world, that this is a true incentive for them to actually put that infrastructure onto the rooftop, and including being the first in a certain area before the neighbor does it. So in terms of business buildings, even apartment complexes, shopping malls, train stations, right, infrastructure, there's a huge incentive to put that in place. And as we said, if you charge them per landing, you have a huge ROI on that business. And obviously we have some partners already in line with that can confirm that. And that's also the part on why we are so actively partnering with public or private-public partnership institutions like airport operators, like train stations, simply because they already have the access. They do see the benefit of integrating this new mode of transportation. And I think our work with Aéroports de Paris, with Fraport, with Heathrow, and others, speaks volumes about how eager they are to also look forward to a future of integrating eVTOL into their domains.
Right. So it's not a question of having to start with nothing in many of these places.
No, it's not. And by the way, we can start with a humble single heliport if that's what we find at the outset, and then we can gradually scale it, right? We can ease our way into establishing more pads, establishing a whole network, ultimately covering the entire city. I think there's a very gradual, sequential approach to this, which makes this really attractive also from a capital deployment risk perspective. It's not like an Uber, who if they enter a new city, they need to build critical mass of drivers and demand from day one. So that means heavy investments in marketing and all that. We don't have that. We can really start very humble and then continue to grow in a very healthy manner.
Mm-hmm. That makes good sense. Excellent. Jim, in a minute, I'm going to have to go, and I hate to do that, but what I propose is I ask another set of related questions, and then if I may, I'll hand over to you to mop up the remaining time and the remaining questions. Does that work for you, Jim?
That works for me. Thank you, Charles.
Perfect. Okay, well, a couple of more related technical questions here. So first of all, gosh, I'm losing track of who these are coming from. I think, forgive me, I've lost the names here. It doesn't matter. First question is, do you believe, excuse me, wrong one. Yes, somebody's asking to gain an operator's certificate. So this is, you've got the aircraft certified, you're looking to be an operator. Do you anticipate the need for having, quite specific restrictions on altitude and routing and weather restrictions? Do you think it's going to get quite granular in that respect? And then somebody else is asking, and I think this is a good one, have you done any sort of weather modeling on how you're going to deal with the different climates? I mean, you're talking about operating in Singapore and Dubai, where heat is an issue. And then at this time of the year, you might be in New York City dealing with sub-zero temperatures. Is it too early to start thinking about that sort of thing?
No, it's definitely not too early to start thinking about such things. And actually, that's part of our decision matrix to really find out, is a target city a valid target city for us? Does it make sense for us to go with our services into it? Point one. And point two, when we were defining the design of our aircraft, of course, we were looking into it that the capabilities of the aircraft is opening up sufficient market potential in that situation in there. So, sorry. Yeah, what are the limitations, granularity in there? I mean, thinking back again, we are flying in the city, in the urban mission in there. So what we are clearly expecting and what we will be starting off with is that we will be flying under the equivalence to someday VFR conditions in the cities, where we have clear visibility reference and where we can safely operate the aircraft in it. So as you're likely familiar with the limitations for rotorcrafts, and that's already pretty narrow. So we can open up there quite a lot of operational windows in the cities. And yes, we have done that modeling. Yes, we have done that analyzing of the weather history over the past years to really see, yes, the availability is beyond or clearly beyond the minimum thresholds that we see for our viabilities. And that works surprisingly well for those mega cities that we are all targeting, many of them being at rather low levels, many of them being rather close even to some seasides in there, where we have reasonably balanced weather conditions in there. So from that end, yes, we were definitely looking. We are continuously looking at the weather modeling. Again, also our Volo IQ somehow kicks in there, because yes, of course, the Volo IQ is also integrating the weather situations in there, and there is a lot more behind that we can use to make the situation available. Will it be very fragmented? I don't think so. Will there be a common threshold? I personally think yes. When really going into the cities, you cannot start off with going IFR into the cities. If you want to do this, then you end up with the IFR approach routes that you know from heliports today, which is basically canceling off the majority of the city landscape, of the city skyline for you to operate in. So if you really want to go into the cities, take these approaches, go into that, which also means you do not need to develop your vehicle to be capable to go beyond that for a city mission. Again, the perfect fit for that mission that we are having.
Excellent. So this interview will continue without the great accent from Charles. So I have a couple of questions that are related that I'm going to put together, and then we'll close out with one very important question that has received a lot of input here. So the first one is related to pilot training. So could you go into a little bit of detail about the pilot training? What will it entail? What kind of qualifications are you expecting to be needed? And then to follow on with that, can you provide some of the details of the features and capabilities of the flight control system that will affect the pilot training?
Yeah, and Oliver, I would suggest you take that question, but let me quickly make a quick statement before, because unfortunately I have a hard stop at the full hour as well, so I'm going to need to drop out in a minute. And Oliver, I'll excuse you for another couple of minutes, and then you can come and join that meeting later. Just very quickly, I think it's really important, and I love this format because it gives us a chance to kind of present our viewpoint and really, engage in these questions and these concerns, sometimes with more depth. And I think this is really what the next, level of discussion around this industry should be about. It should be about, how do we solve these questions for real and getting into the substance of essence of these, issues. So I really appreciate the format. Thank you very much, Vertical Flight Society, for hosting us. Right, Mike, Jim, fantastic job. And with that, thank you all for tuning in, for your questions. Happy to engage, individually. And I'm going to have to jump off, and Ollie, I'll have your back for the next minute. Okay, I'll excuse you.
Florian, before you drop off, there's one question that does need to get answered before you go.
Sure.
When are you expecting to have Volocity flying?
Volocity flying commercially based on EASA commercial air, passenger transportation certificate towards the end of 2022.
All right, I think that answers
Paris
it.
and Singapore being in pole position, but the race is still on.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time very much.
Bye for now.
Okay, then I will take the question on the pilot training, and of course that's a vital one and a critical one to look at. Here we are in the very lucky position that also our home authority EASA has recognized the absolute need for getting a consistent picture available and in place. Actually, what we are doing with EASA for the EASA markets and all authorities following EASA in this is to define a specific pilot license for these kind of vehicles, which is built upon the competency-based training concept, therefore also offers transparency between the different license categories, as we know it already from the commercial airline licenses. And so that's the kind of concept that we are using in there, and it will be dedicated for, they call it the APL, Automated Pilot License. And what is interesting in there is that recognizes that eVTOL flying is not the natural continuation of legacy aviation. It's more the entry point into flying unmanned aircraft and into flying highly automated and later on autonomous aircrafts. So they are docking into that end. But we do not need to wait for this. So actually what has been the cleared path with all the authorities we have been talking with right now is that we can settle on top of a CPL, commercial pilot license, for either fixed wing or rotorcraft, and then can do a type rating essentially on top of it that qualifies them for flying the eVTOL aircraft. It doesn't need to by far to be a rotorcraft license, because many of the specific capabilities and skills that you need to fly a rotorcraft, they are plainly not needed on an eVTOL. Simplest example, auto rotation. Well, we just don't have it. We just don't need it in there. You don't need the skills for it. It's a completely different way of flying it. That's why the authorities on either side of all the oceans are absolutely open to say, doesn't matter who it is, which basic license it is. From there, we can settle on top with a Delta training to really get the type rating to get onto the markets with this.
Excellent. I don't know if I should do this or not, but I apparently misrepresented the last question. The folks on the line are asking not so much when we'll have certification of velocity, but when or if there has been a first flight of the aircraft. Are you able to put that one out there?
Yeah, well, as we are speaking, we are getting the 5th generation of this aircraft, which is in the type certification process, finalized, and it will fly this year in multiple versions.
All right, very good. We have several more questions, but I believe you have another meeting to get to, if I'm not mistaken, as do some of the other folks here. So we're going to wrap it up there. I will coordinate with Elena. Maybe we'll get some of these questions out, and you can provide written answers back to us. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fabulous interview. We appreciate you taking time out. This will get posted up on our website shortly for all those that are listening in, if you want to go back and listen to certain parts. But Oliver, we do appreciate your expertise, and of course, we always wish you success, and do come back and update us when you have the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us here. I can only repeat what Florian said. It was our great pleasure, and it's really a good format and an excellent chance. We're absolutely happy. Send us in the written questions. We are absolutely happy to respond to them, and to all the media folks on the line, for sure, get in contact with us if there is more that you like to know, and follow us on all our channels, and you will get all the news that we have to share with you. And it will be quite a number of news upcoming in the continuation of that year. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Enjoy the rest of your day. And for everyone on the line, appreciate you tuning in. And we will catch you, hopefully all of you, next week for our next interview, which was with a company called Invention. So with that, we will turn the webinar off, and we will let you proceed with your day. Thanks again, and see you again soon.